Um, I never, I don't like the way that most of the textbooks discuss extinction stuff. It shows up a lot on the AP test, so I've made for you a separate lecture. I normally do this in the classroom with a lot of visuals, and I leverage your participation because of your endangered species assignment. Obviously, we can't do the classroom thing now. Um, so instead, at 10 p.m., I'm here talking to myself in the man cave. Um, let's see here. Uh, I once had a big group of students absent suddenly. One of the academies had a field trip that they had to change. And so I was planning this lecture, and like 60 students couldn't be there. So 6 or 7 years ago, I made them notes for this lecture. And I just dug them up, and I thought, remote learning, maybe I'll throw you a bone. And so I've attached those notes on Neo. Remember that the stuff that you read is not the same as the stuff that you write. If you're not making it with your own pencil, you're not really helping your brain to remember it later. So I still recommend that you annotate or doodle on or write on, underline, highlight the notes that I printed, but you may not need to take notes on this one. You can just modify the document that you'll find on Neo next to this video. Okay, let's talk about extinction. There's a lot of things that cause extinction. It happens all the time. You didn't have any trouble finding species that are on the edge of extinction because extinction is actually pretty common. There are natural extinctions, like plain old natural selection, losers. Sometimes species just go extinct. If we hadn't done anything, condors would have probably gone extinct right around now anyhow. They've been excluded by other competitors. The environment has changed, so they don't really have megafauna to feed on. And so condors, I think, were doomed for natural extinction any day now. Droughts wipe things out. Species just go extinct sometimes. It happens. And there's also big mass extinctions. We know from the fossil record that there have been 5 big ones. There's some new data that just came out weeks ago that there may have been like a double hump extinction in one of the 5. So maybe it was 6. But basically, we talk about the 5 mass extinctions. These are big. That's when a whole bunch of stuff dies at once. Remember that if you wipe out 1/2 of all individuals, you're not going to lose 1/2 of species. If I kill half the students at Santa Barbara High School, we probably still have some remaining redhead, some remaining blonde, some remaining dark hair, brown hair, whatever. So mass extinctions are special because you lose a lot of species. Conditions change so that species just can't survive. Every individual of that species goes extinct. Pretty rare. You have to kind of wonder what would have to happen for every dog on Earth to die, or every cat, and that's just one extinction. Like, what would have to happen for every mammal to die? These are rare. And we know from the fossil record that every single mass extinction, all 5, were caused by rapid climate change. Climate always changes, but it changes slowly. Usually climate changes slower than species evolve. So generally speaking, background climate change is just underlying rhythm, but not an extinction threat. Rapid climate change is a big one. A volcano goes off and burps out a bunch of gases that wouldn't otherwise have reached the atmosphere and changes the climate, for example. or a meteor hits the Earth and blankets the Earth in dust, and that makes the planet cooler because there isn't enough light hitting the Earth. It's like putting on a shade cloth over the whole planet. We have to be very careful with rapid climate change. Hint, rapid climate change. I got to point out that mass extinctions aren't like a whole species goes extinct at once. People talk about the dinosaurs as if the meteor killed all the dinosaurs like that day or something, but that's bogus. Mass extinctions take place over long periods of time, many, many, many years. It's reasonable to believe that the previous 5 mass extinctions probably had about 1,000 years of elevated extinction rate. Maybe thousands, plural, Devonian. Because, you know, when climate changes quickly, that changes the chemistry of water, that changes the chemistry of the atmosphere. The rapid change in climate can change rainfall patterns, temperature patterns, heat waves, drought, storms. So you got to imagine that all of the plants are like, wait, what's going on? And so you'll start to see producers going extinct. And then there's these reverberations up the food chain. What we say sudden is a geological term. If you were alive during a mass extinction, you might not even notice it. If you had ancestors that told you stories, you might be like, wait a minute. Grandpa said those used to flower all the time, and now I never see them flower. That's what I'm talking about. Changes in climate means atmospheric and water chemistry are different, climate patterns are different, temperatures are different, producers start to go away, so the insects disappear, so the fish disappear, so the birds disappear. Remember all of those community level interactions. And if you do the math, like just look through all the layers of rock, as long as we've got layers of rock, a good global average, I got to admit, there's a lot of ways to talk about these numbers, but a good global average is 2 species per year. That's just your background rate. We call that base level extinction or background extinction. But that's not really what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the anthropogenic extinctions. That's the ones that we cause. Anthropos, humans, genic, like Genesis, like birthed in humans or caused by humans. Anthropogenic. And these are extra. There's a handy acronym for you. It's HIPPO for habitat loss, invasive species, pollution, poaching, and overharvesting. And normally, if we were in class, I would say, raise your hand if your species was primarily threatened by habitat loss. And 95% of the kids would raise their hand because that's the big one. We either cut up habitat so species can no longer interbreed, or we just pollute the habitat. Like, oh, I used to like the coral reef and now it sucks here. We might just ruin their habitat, replace it with something different that they can't adapt to, fill in all the wetlands and start farms. And those farms are beautiful for you and me, but they suck for the frog or whatever. And I've always struggled to find the right way to do this. There's this thing called the species area effect. It's tough to explain this, but you should remember that habitat loss is a bigger problem when that habitat is rare. So, for example, if we're talking about chaparral, if you lose an acre of chaparral and there's 1,000 acres around you, you probably are not going to lose any species. Because like the frog that died on this acre still exists as a species over there. And like when I lose this acre, that's going to suck for some of the ants that used to live here, but that species of ant still lives right there. and I lose an acre, that's 47 mice, but that mouse species still occurs somewhere else. So habitat loss means the loss of individuals, but if you still have a bunch of that habitat, you're not really losing any species, you're just losing individuals of that species. If you bomb one block in Santa Barbara, we've lost some individual redheads and some individual blondes and some individual brown-haired people. But there are still redheads and blondes and brown-haired people throughout Santa Barbara. Losing that first block doesn't really matter because there's a lot of other blocks that still hold most of your diversity. But as habitat becomes more rare, an acre now has a bigger impact on diversity. If there's only 2 blocks left in all of Santa Barbara and we lose one of those, well, dang, that might have been the only redheads left, or that might have been the only brunettes left. And you can imagine that as that habitat becomes more rare, you're going to lose the same number of individuals, but those might have been the last unique individuals for some species. That's called the species area effect. The idea that habitat loss has a bigger impact on diversity if that habitat is a rare habitat. That's why people make such a big fuss about the Gaviota Coast. Like, that's the last chunk of coastal Mediterranean in California, and by the way, possibly some of the last coastal Mediterranean on Earth. You know, when we have a ton of rainforest, you can chop down some trees. Who gives a crap? There's still monkeys and toucans over there. But when you get down to the last little pocket of rainforest, that's really precious. I could give up 1,000 miles of forest to begin with, but the last acre, that's like the life raft. Imagine sinking Noah's Ark. Sorry about the biblical references. I'm not really good at that, but you get what I mean. As habitat becomes more rare, you now are hosting the last examples of a whole bunch of diversity. Okay, species area effect. Anyway, humans do a lot of stuff to impact habitat. We dominate, depending on how you measure it, somewhere between 30 and 70% of the surface of the earth. Number B is invasive species. These are introduced, non-native. And so a new animal shows up, all the local animals are like not used to that. They haven't evolved with that other animal, so it has like an advantage. It's like the new guy on the block with some cool new tricks. We're going to talk a lot more about invasive species, but this is probably the secondary cause of extinction. This is a big deal. If you were all to raise your hand, for about 10 or 15% of my students' endangered species assignments. Pollution happens everywhere, but remember, pollution is especially critical for things that depend on water, because all pollution becomes water pollution eventually. The atmosphere is washed by rain, the land is washed by rain, and all of that stuff pools up. So we say that pollution is particularly important for animals that breed or breathe in water. You could also say respiration and reproduction, but I like to do the 2 B's. Poaching is kind of a problem. That's illegal hunting, and overharvesting is another problem that's legal but poorly regulated. That's how you get hippo. But soon it'll be chippo, because see, climate change is really becoming a bigger problem. So far, not really, but it's starting to show. It's becoming the future of extinction. It will climb to be the first. That's why I put chippo at the beginning. That's why I put the C at the beginning of Chippo. Whatever, you know what I mean. Um, there's a persistent misunderstanding. You'll get in an argument with a bunch of Karens that are like, oh my God, who cares? It's just 1 degree. And they're right. Climate change does not cause extinctions because the planet gets 1 degree hotter. Don't get into that argument, because nobody's actually arguing that the rise in temperature itself kills entire species. You see, what happens is every species in an ecosystem can adjust just fine to the planet getting 1 degree hotter. It's not that much. Polar bears love it when it's warm. I saw a polar bear in Memphis, Tennessee in the middle of summer. Happiest polar bear I've ever seen. It was in a zoo, but every species can adjust to the temperature being higher. What's interesting is they're all going to adjust independently, and they might adjust in different ways. So insects might lay their eggs in a different pond because it's hotter, so they got to go to a pond that's deeper or further uphill or something. Flowers just open up a little earlier. And migratory ducks, they just, migrate a little earlier. And the coyote that eats the ducks, they just move a little bit uphill in the mountains. And adjusting to temperature is not the problem for any of the species I mentioned, but they're all going to go extinct. Every one of those I mentioned. Not because of the temperature, but because all of those species evolved together. The coyote was able to eat the duck that landed there at just the right time to eat all the baby bugs that were hatched after the parents pollinated the flower. But now that community has spread apart. So the flower that can just open a week earlier has lost the insect that used to pollinate it, and now the flower will go extinct. The insects, I can't even remember my story anymore. The insects now can't find a suitable flower, and so the number of babies that they make every year goes down until they go extinct. The duck, what did I say about the duck? They went north or something. They land in a place that no longer has the food for them to get fat enough to finish the journey northward. The coyote now lives in an environment that doesn't have the big ducks to let the coyote fatten up enough to rear its babies in the spring. And so all of these species will go extinct, not because it's 1 degree hotter, but because that 1 degree has changed the range and timing and behavior of its community. This is called ecosystem shear. The relationships no longer line up. And we're seeing this already. There's no debate about this. You should Google these numbers. I'll just make something up, but it's probably close. I think of 300 species whose habitat has been tracked for 50 years in the Sierra. All but 2 have shifted their habitat in response to climate change. The timing of flowers and butterflies has been demonstrated to shift almost every place on the planet where butterflies and flowers occur together. The temperature itself is not the big deal. It's that species respond differently, so they can't connect anymore. keep your eye on this. As you get older, you're going to hear this more. Anyway, if you add together the hippo plus the sea that's coming, you get what's called the Holocene extinction event. The Holocene is the present. We are living in the age of man, the Holocene. And just like the other extinctions were named after periods in geology, the Jurassic, the Permian, the Devonian, and I forget the other ones, Meso something. Anyway, I forget the other ones. This one is called the Holocene extinction event. And it's picking up a lot of steam. We believe that extinction rates today are roughly 100 times the background rate. And if you map those extinction rates, we're right about to get steeper than they ever were in the previous extinctions. In other words, this is going to be the largest mass extinction event ever, and it's already there. We're already outside of background rates. We're losing a lot more than 2 species a year. We're losing on average about 200 species a year. That's a complicated projection. We could argue about that number, but even if I'm wrong, it's a huge number and it's really scary. It's interesting to note who goes extinct. It's pretty much always the big stuff, you know, because they need a whole bunch of habitat, because they breed slowly, because they live a long life. And so they've got a lot of chances or a lot of places where something could go wrong. Number 2, anything that we like, it's screwed. Think about it. We're like, oh my God, look at that snow leopard. And then we just hit them in the head with a stick and then we wear them on their neck. Yeah, America. Everything we like, we kill it. We just love it to death. We're like Lenny. We just go like, oh my God, the tiger is so majestic. It'll cure my erectile dysfunction. And then we just kill all the tigers and then we powder all their testicles and we make tea out of that. If we like something, it's screwed. Things that are hypersensitive are also likely to go extinct. That's true of any mass extinction. But remember, all pollution becomes water pollution, so this is particularly tied to things that breathe in water. Also the specialists. Again, that's a normal pattern. Not just us, not just humans, but specialists always are the first to go extinct because they rely on so many details. They're so specialized, like the name suggests. Migratory species are screwed because they depend on multiple places. So if something goes wrong in any of their stops, then they can't make it to the next one. You ever been to that gas station in Barstow that if you don't stop there for gas, you're not getting to Las Vegas? Imagine if that gas station were to blow up, then you're screwed, right? So migratory species depend on a whole bunch of places to be intact. And of course, remember, like we already discussed, that any species which is already at a genetic risk, if it's isolated by circumstance, like the pika on the mountains, or if it's bottlenecked for whatever reason, like the elephant seals because they were hunted, or the cheetahs because their migrations were limited. And you know what's funny? Who's left is the exact opposite. And if you describe the opposite of what I just said, look what you get. Like, you can go to that previous slide if you want. Stuff that is not big, it's small. Not slow growing, it's fast growing. Not slow breeding, it's fast breeding. Not stuff we like, it's stuff we don't like. It's not sensitive, it's tough. It's not specialized, it's a generalist. It's not isolated, it's common. In other words, little fast growing, fast breeding stuff we don't like that's hardy, generalist, and common. Ants, cockroaches, mice, rats, weeds. These will spawn our new future. The age of mammals was spawned by a little mouse that lived in trees. It was common. It was a tree shrew, technically, but I got to consider a little tiny bit of perspective before I finish this. You should ask yourself, like, oh my God, is this bad? I don't know. Everybody feels so guilty all the time. Like, I don't know, man. Maybe we shouldn't feel guilty. I mean, it's bad for humans because we depend on an intact planet. But we're doing this, so I guess it's kind of what we get, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe that's not fair, but humanity as a whole is doing this, and so it sucks for humanity as a whole. Meh. Really sucks if you're a naturalist like me. I just love to like sit outside and look at birds or whatever. Like I take my kids outside and we just like dork out on dolphins. But whatever, extinction's not new. As a matter of fact, there's this pattern that you have to know. This is vocab. It's called punctuated equilibrium, where like niches are gradually divided into more specialized niches. As long as the environment is stable, you get more and more diversity. You split niches into smaller niches. That's called punctuated speciation. As soon as the planet is stable, species diversify, avoid competition, break up, do little tiny specialized tasks. And then these are cleared out by these occasional moments that just wipe the deck clean. Those are called punctuated extinction. But if you look through the fossil record, we've roughly had the same amount of biomass no matter what. That's the equilibrium part. So specialization increases when the Earth is stable and you get a whole bunch of specialized species. Then a volcano or a meteor or a human will change the atmosphere, and all of a sudden climate shifts and they all get wiped out, and then a few survivors make a whole bunch of new species. It's kind of beautiful. If you Google this term, you'll see these lines that radiate and then they get cut off, and then some survivor radiates into new species. And it's pretty normal. That's happened before. Whether it was a volcano or a meteor, rapid climate change just kind of scrambles the dice, and then you get like, whoa, it's a new playing game, and like there's new things happening, like, oh, it used to be dinosaurs, now it's mammals, and there was like a period of giant insects for a while. There was a time when all the life was in the water and nothing was on land. So I don't know, in terms of like life, like capital L, like in the cosmic sense, I'm not worried at all. I don't give a crap. 99.99% of all the species on Earth are already extinct. We are living in a blip, and we look around and we're like, oh, I like that one, I like that one. But they weren't guaranteed to last forever. If humans hadn't popped up, there would have still been another volcano or meteor down the road, right? So I'm not cosmically worried about extinction at all. Like, you stop thinking about the human time frame and you just blow that up a little bit to millions of years, and who cares? Humans come, humans go. And there's like the dust settles and climate stabilizes, and the jellyfish will take over the earth, and it'll be the age of the jellyfish. And there's like jellyfish like galloping across the savannas, and like big flying jellyfish. It was like screaming through the air. Who knows? Age of the ants, age of the cockroaches, big giant cockroaches caring for their young. Cockroaches with like, I don't know, little pouches like kangaroos. I don't know. Who knows? Like, cool stuff is going to evolve. I don't really care about life. And like, you're going to be fine, right? Like, I'm going to be fine. Like, you and I, we're the privileged few. We're at the top of the ivory tower. Our food supply is not under threat. Our water volume is guaranteed. We got so much water on this continent. Look at the size of North America, y'all. We got all the guns. We got a bunch of food. We got all the inventions. We got all the money. Apparently, we're building a wall now, so don't worry about it. Like, you're going to be fine. You'll die fat and happy like me. the one reason I need you to care about extinction and about species disappearing is that elsewhere on this earth, there are people who depend on a healthy ecosystem to feed them, to house them, to warm their children. And those people have been suffering already. Environmental degradation is like a intellectual exercise for you and me. I go outside after I give you my stupid ass lecture, and my backyard is beautiful. There's birds singing. I got flowers and fruit. You probably do too, right? The poorest among you. You're still living in like the most beautiful place. I need to remind you that that's not a global reality. And you have to be a pretty harsh human not to care at all. About a quarter, maybe a fifth of humanity does not have a dependable food supply. Depending on which data source you like, maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 8 humans has to spend a majority of their waking hours to pick up water and fuel to survive, like sticks to burn. It's a lot of us, our fellow man, who depend on a healthy environment. And so extinction doesn't have to scare you. Like, you're good, bro. But extinction has to worry you unless you have absolutely no regard for other humans. And that's what scares me the most. Is that we're watching the world starve. We're watching babies die on the ground, and we're like, eh. The implications of mass extinction to me are life and death to my fellow man. And frankly, maybe it's my cultural history or whatever, but I identify more with the poor who are struggling than with the rest of my fellow neighbors who aren't actually struggling. I don't really think about them a lot. I really worry what extinction means for the rest of the world. So remember that this is a social justice issue. Okay. On that heavy note, hopefully we get to talk about this in class sometime, because I think this is an interesting topic. Bye.